Good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers for preparing this meeting and for providing me with the opportunity to share some observations on the role of civil society and the public at large in the return of assets, and how to ensure that the repatriated funds are used towards the fulfillment of human rights and of the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Mathias Huter. I serve as the Managing Director of the UNCAC Coalition, a Vienna-based civil society network of some 400 non-governmental organizations from around the world, committed to advancing the implementation of the UN Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC. We also host a dedicated civil society working group on asset recovery, co-chaired by colleagues from Transparency International France and CFAR. We believe that transparent and accountable asset recovery efforts should involve civil society representatives from the involved jurisdictions at all stages of the recovery and return process. Numerous civil society reports on national UNCAC implementation highlight that many states have yet to implement and operationalize asset recovery provisions and have yet to put in place adequately resourced entities or teams focused on asset recovery cases. Very few countries have put in place asset recovery strategies or policy guidance documents that explain how a country approaches its asset recovery efforts, and providing also information about the competent bodies for international asset recovery. Switzerland is a positive example that has published such information. Despite efforts from UNODC and the STAR initiative to map international asset recovery efforts, we only have a partial picture. There are hardly any countries that regularly publish statistics about their asset recovery efforts. The United Kingdom is a noteworthy exception. It releases asset recovery statistical bulletins, which could serve as a model for other countries to build on, enabling the public to monitor and discuss developments. It is crucial that civil society, victims groups, and the general public have access to key documents related to asset recovery and return processes to ensure public accountability and prevent a relooting of returned funds. Meaningful transparency means that documents, including relevant court decisions, memoranda of understanding, asset return agreements, as well as any follow-up, such as implementation and audit reports, documenting the use of the funds, are published proactively by the governments involved, and that information is also made available in national languages and easily accessible formats. The practice we have observed so far varies widely. In some cases, governments have released some documents on asset returns proactively, but in many cases this is not done. When civil society requests the release of such information through freedom of information requests, the responses vary. Sometimes such requests for the release of documents are granted in a timely manner. For example, Ireland quickly released a bilateral return agreement with Nigeria upon request. But in several cases, we have seen that requests for documents and information remain unanswered for many months, even years, or are being denied by states. And such practice undermines the ability of social watchdogs to advance public debates on the return and use of stolen assets, both in the countries where those assets were stolen and in the jurisdictions they were moved to. Corruption is not a victimless crime. However, in practice, victim representatives are rarely considered, consulted, and involved in asset return processes. A recent report by STAR entitled Victims of Corruption, Back for Payback found that only 3 of the 56 jurisdictions surveyed knew about the involvement of victims of corruption in asset return proceedings. One case worth highlighting was the return of $322 million of the so-called Abacha loot from Switzerland to Nigeria, which were disbursed as cash payments to poor families. This disbursement was systematically monitored by the NGO ANEJ and a network of local CSOs, which not only helped to identify corruption risks, but also facilitated public debates and thus public awareness of the return. I have been a member of the Civil Society Advisory Council of the United Nations Uzbekistan Vision 2030 Fund. It is one of the few examples where civil society has been granted a formal role to engage with an asset return process. I hope that this example will provide useful lessons for future return processes, and I hope that the Council will be able to play an active role in informing the fund's activities, as well as in promoting public debates on how the returned funds are used to the benefit of the people of Uzbekistan. Even in return processes where civil society representatives are involved, they cannot by themselves ensure that the funds are used to advance human rights and for the benefit of the people. To ensure transparency and accountability, asset return mechanisms should have strong policies and mechanisms to A. Protect any persons who report concerns and possible wrongdoing in the use of the returned funds. B. To disclose and manage any real and perceived conflicts of interest of entities and people involved. C. To automatically disclose in detail who benefits, including details on the implementing organizations, contracts, contracting data, as well as information on beneficial owners of contractors and subcontractors, and details on how the funds are used, as well as D, a strong access to information policy to allow members of the public to request information that is not published by default online. To conclude, we need to establish more and better opportunities and mechanisms that allow for meaningful engagement of civil society and victim representatives in asset recovery and return processes. And we need state-of-the-art transparency and accountability mechanisms in asset return procedures to allow for public monitoring and help ensure that the returned assets have a maximum positive impact on the enjoyment of human rights and benefit the people who have suffered from corruption. Thank you very much.